Another artist, then, who's really firmly going to land in the period of the Rococo and bring with it and bring with him many more of the themes that we sort of associate with the Rococo is Jean-Henri Fragonard. Fragonard, born in 1732, died in 1806, was more of a late Rococo painter. And he's known, like Watteau, for his genre paintings of the aristocracy. Genre painting for, I think I may have talked about this back in the Renaissance, but I might not have. So let me dive into it at least a little bit. A genre painting is just meant to be a painting of like everyday life. That's referred to as a genre painting. It was particularly a particularly famous genre of painting in Northern Europe, right, during the time of Rembrandt and artists of that ilk. He's going to bring that to the aristocracy. And again, you're going to see the aristocracy. He's going to give us depictions of hedonism, depictions of intimacy, not unlike what we saw happening with Watteau, and veiled eroticism, right, to an even greater extent than what we saw with Watteau. So there's this painting, which we already took at least a brief look at a moment ago. This is probably his most famous painting, The Swing, from 1766. And again, all of the Rococo elements are on display for us. We have an extremely ornate composition, stuff everywhere. Again, the bucolic nature of all this foliage that's all over the place, right? The asymmetrical design of it off. Again, all the action happening down here, and we talked about if you kind of draw a line here, all the action's taking place in an even smaller portion of the painting. We have those creamy pastel colors. There's her like beautiful pastel pink dress. There are all these pastel greens and blues that surround them, right? These are creamy colors. There's very little black. These are creamy colors that the Baroque just didn't really make much use of. But it's Fragonard as well. And so we have, again, aristocracy engaging in frivolity. But if it's Fragonard, there's going to be something in there that is some, at least thinly veiled eroticism. Now, we look at this, again, in the 21st century, this doesn't feel erotic to us at all, but boy, would it have been in its time. Let me sort of walk you through some things. Oh, first, by the way, we have, again, a statue of Cupid up here, kind of a Puteau, a figure. So what do we have here? Well, we have this woman on the swing, but what is happening? She is on a swing, yes, right? But there's also this dude right here, right? And another dude back here. And again, a couple of statues of Putti who are onlookers. And so the scenario that we seem to have here, there's this man back here who seems to be some sort of member of the clergy, perhaps, who seems to be trying to help out his dude over here, right? Man, there's something about the Rococo and wingmen, man. So what this guy right here seems to have done, he is pulling on these two ropes that are attached to the swing. So he's pulling them in order to allow her to sort of swing forward and back. And again, he seems to be in cahoots with this dude right here, who is lying down in the bushes, hiding himself out and getting himself in the perfect position that when she swings up like she is right now, he gets himself a perfect little upskirt shot, right? That's what he's down here for. He wants to see what is happening up in there, right? Now, but and as predatory as that might seem to us, look at the body language. Look at the body language, right? She has been portrayed as being very aware he's down there. She's giving him a look like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know you're down there. I know what you're up to, and she has even kicked off her shoe. The shoe is going to go flying. The implication is she's kicked it off so that the guy down there who's not being particularly all that great of a gentleman right now can go be a gentleman, go hunt down her shoe and bring it back to her and return it to her and court her properly. But in this particular moment, both of them are engaged in this sexy moment, if you will, right? Where this man is completely objectifying her and has done so with help of this guy back here. But there's a certain impish pleasure that she's taking from it. Like she knows what he's up to, and she's watching, right, and kicking his shoe off. And this may be a bit more innocent, if you will, than some of Fragonard's stuff, and we'll get to that in a moment. But still, it's odd to me sometimes to think that the women of the aristocracy were the ones commissioning a lot of this work, because oftentimes women are treated as absolute objects in these paintings. And as another great example of that, I present to you a painting painted in 1776, 79-ish, somewhere in there, called The Lock. And, boy. Right, now, maybe this one gets a bit away from the creamy pastel color scheme, although there's a little bit of that. There's certainly an asymmetrical composition, right? The main action is happening down here, this area. And it is the aristocracy engaged in, I'll put it in quotations this time, frivolity. But perhaps to our 21st century eyes, this feels a little more icky and a little less humorous as it would have been meant in its time. Because what we seem to have here, we have this scene before us where we are in a lady's bedchamber. This is and she is in her bedclothes. She was clearly here asleep, and this man, also in his bedclothes, has just entered her bedchamber, obviously mad for love, if you will, and has snatched her out of the bed, has closed the door behind him, and is reaching up to lock the door. Now, we know why. We know why that he is reaching up to lock the door. He is locking that door so that no one who might be outside this bedchamber could come in and interrupt what is about to happen in this bedchamber. But look at her body language. She's reaching for that lock herself. She's in a position of resistance. Depending on how consent has been ascertained here, we are looking at a potential sexual assault. Again, this would have been seen as humorous at the time. This, again, would have been a piece that would have been commissioned by most likely a woman, and would have been in either her boudoir or her love nest. We'll dive into that in a bit here. But this would have been meant to be humorous, right? Because it's like, I see what he's doing. Oh, he's locking the door. That scamp. You see what he is up to. And I see what she's doing too, right? She's reaching up. She's putting a little bit of resistance up. But if you look at her face, right, this isn't. There's a sense that she is putting up the expected resistance, right? She is putting up the resistance she is supposed to as a lady. But it's more of a, oh no, please stop, no, don't kind of thing, right? There's visual language that she's putting up some resistance, but that resistance is only going to last so long, and that it's only obligatory resistance. And I see that, and that would have been seen as humorous as well, right? That would have been like, oh, yep, I see. No, she's acting like she doesn't want it. And we all know she does want it, doesn't she? She wants it. And once he gets that door locked, man, are they going to have some wild times on that bed right there? That kind of, I don't know. This is what I struggle with. I struggle with Rococo because, again, it is trying to portray the everyday goings on of a culture I struggle to understand, and a culture that is often treating women in a way that I struggle to understand. And I also struggle to understand how it was that women would be the ones who were the patrons of stuff like this, because so often they're treated very poorly in this work. But again, at this time, right, the Rococo was often referred to by its critics as a feminizing of art. This is, again, as a pejorative. This isn't meant to be a positive. Right? They're saying that art has become women's stuff when you talk about the Rococo. So we're going to look at the Rococo, a group of women referred to as the Saulniers, women patrons of this artwork, and women artists themselves in 18th century France. So let's first talk about the salons. And you'll note here that I put in parentheses a private gallery. That is to differentiate this type of salon from the official sort of state-sanctioned salons that we'll talk about at a later point. So in this context, the word salon refers to gatherings in the homes of wealthy aristocrats in and around Paris that were held at regularly scheduled intervals. At these salons, there were intellectual topics that were discussed, like science, mathematics, philosophy, art, etc. They were overseen by a woman referred to as a salonier. She was the lady, or madam, French, of course, of the house. She was the lady of the house. She was married to the one who owned the house. And the saloniers became very influential in the development of the Rococo. They were often nearly as powerful as their male counterparts. And at a time when society was defined and regulated almost completely by men, women could be a more powerful influence in these salons. These saloniers would select the guests, they would choose the topics of discussion, they curated the art exhibitions, and they mediated the debates that would happen. So, and understand, because these are happening in places that women controlled, and women at this time in France could not attend academies and universities, many ambitious women of the time used the salons to pursue a form of higher education. So the saloniers, again, lady of the house, she would send out invitations, right? So what this would happen, right? There would be a salon at a salonier's house. Again, it would take place in the places that she herself had control over in the house. So generally her sitting room, right? And she would decide on topics that would be discussed, and she would put out invitations to speakers in the fields that she was interested in talking about that day. Come and speak, and then she put out invitations to both men and women. Right? We're going to have this is the scientific discussion that we will have. Here's what art we'll be looking at. Here are the philosophical ideas that we'll be debating. come and enjoy. And then everyone would show up at the appointed date and time, and a very intellectual discussion would happen at the salon. And again, as I mentioned, many women, as a result, were able to sort of use this as an informal university. The saloniers had a certain amount of power, and again, the artwork that would have been on the walls of their boudoirs, of their sitting rooms, of their love nests would have been Rococo art. So this art, they might have their new painting that they just had commissioned, and that might be on display, and that would be discussed as well. Right? So a lot of this artwork that we've been looking at in the Rococo was discussed and viewed. It was not meant for the gallery spaces. It was meant first and foremost for spaces like this. And this painting here by Francois Boucher in 1750 of a particularly well-known Saulnier, Madame de Pompadour. If we want to understand the kind of position that the Saulniers had at this time, a good way of ascertaining that is to look at how they chose to have themselves represented. So here it is, Madame de Pompadour, and let me get my laser pointer back. Right, and again, very Baroque. Look at this. Look at all these pastel colors. Look at this asymmetrical composition. Right, she is sort of pushed down here. And how has she chosen to present herself? Well, certainly, she wants us to see her as feminine. Right, she has had Boucher paint her in this very lovely floral green and pink dress that we would associate with femininity. Right, she doesn't seem to want to hide that away. But she does not have herself presented as just an object to be stared at. She is not meant to be a sexual. She is not meant to be a sexual object, an object of just pure lustful desire. How has she presented herself instead? Now, she certainly seems to be in her boudoir. Right, she is here, kind of lying on a couch or bed with lots of pillows and cushions. There is a mirror behind her, by the way, which is why we can sort of see her head reflected there. And what is she doing? She's in her boudoir, but she's reading a book. And it has dropped. Her hand, we can imagine, was just up here. She was reading, and her hand is just now sort of dropped, and her eyes are sort of looking off into the distance, as if she's just read something that has given her a moment of pause. Right? Surely, at least I hope, at some point in your life you have had that experience where you read something, or if you weren't reading something and you saw something in a film, what have you, that gave you a moment where you had to stop and sort of think about what you had just taken in. Right? And so she has a moment here. She's got to think about this, what she's just read. She wants us to see her as a thinking woman. She is educating herself, and she's having a moment to pause and think about what she has just read. And over here on this table, we have a candle, and we have all the accoutrement one needs for writing. So not only is she educating herself, she's also a woman who writes stuff, whether they're letters or whether they're her invitations to her salons, or whether she's writing instructional stuff. Who knows? But the point seems to be that we notice that she is a writer of some sort, as well as we have this mirror. It's sort of serving two functions. One is it's showing us that on the other side of the room there is this bookshelf with lots and lots of books in it. Right? That suggests that she's a smart lady as well. But also, just in case anyone should think that she was staring across at some dude who had just entered her chambers, we got this mirror that's letting us know there's no one else here. Right? There's no dude out here in this room who has come in here looking for a romantic tryst. Right? She is spending some time alone, reading, learning, thinking. She's even been accompanied by a little dog down here, who again suggests that she is a faithful wife to her husband. Now, whether or not Madame de Pompadour actually was, that's beside the point. She at least wants herself presented as such. Then here we have, this is a room that we find in the Frick collection in New York City. It's been moved there from its original home in or around Paris. This is a room that is meant to represent what a lady's love nest of this time would have looked like. And it is decorated by lots of Boucher paintings, and he did some of the interior design, right? All the curves and the gold, the circular shaped compositions, things of that nature. Right? This, again, is the kind of place where this was the ultimate destination of Rococo art. It wasn't meant for the galleries. It wasn't meant for royalty. The bourgeois certainly were not interested in this stuff. And so it wasn't getting sort of official recognition in France because it was being displayed in a woman's place, the spaces that women had control over, like a love nest. Now, what did I say? I said I would eventually get around to talking about what a love nest is. So the aristocracy had some loosey-goosey, if you will, ideas about how monogamy worked. Right? Yes, a man and a woman would marry, and in that relationship, the man is supposed to be sort of considered the lord of the house, if you will, and the lady is secondary to him. She is subservient. However, it was extremely common that men of the aristocracy, aristocratic men, would, when building their homes or their palaces or what have you, would build onto it a space referred to as the love nest. And that love nest was a room meant for his wife to entertain gentlemen callers. This was the place where she would have her lovers. As long as she kept it in that particular room, everything was okay. Now, perhaps again in your 21st century way of thinking, we might think to ourselves, how could he? Why in the world would some dude build onto his house a place for his wife to go and have sex with other men? Well, it was just sort of expected that's going to happen, right? Marriages were usually business and or political deals, right? They weren't done for love. They were done to sort of keep money in the family. I guess I should point that out. They were economic deals also. They were done to keep money in the family. They were done to keep certain businesses going. They were done as a means of land deals. They weren't done for love. And so it was just sort of understood. We're not necessarily attracted to or in love with one another, right? As long as you're giving me babies, cool. You can go and have your fun with the men that you are attracted to. And I, the husband, am probably sneaking out every now and then to the love nest of some other dude's wife anyway, right? So that's when I say there were sort of like loose ideas of monogamy. But then again, like you can understand, right? If the bourgeois is very conservative minded, right, and have very, very strict ideas about the male and female roles that should be played out, you can see why this, the fact that art, right, is being displayed in a place like this to them feels wrong. And that stuff is just pure decoration. It's smut, it's porn, and it's stuff made for women, by women, right? That is just amateur stuff. And that was sort of the criticism that were lobbed at it at its time. And speaking of Rococo artists who were women, perhaps one of our most famous would be Elizabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun. Struggle with her name a bit there. Vigée-Lebrun, born in 1755, died in 1842. And her style is generally considered Rococo, but it also shows some interest in neoclassical painting. She would later in her life do some work that was very much leaning toward neoclassicism. But she was never considered a pure neoclassicist, however, since she created mostly portraits rather than history paintings. We'll get into what all that means when we get to the actual neoclassical. Now, she's working for the royal family. She was sort of like a court painter for the royal family at this time. And as I was just saying, there are revolutions that happen at this point in time. There was the American Revolution. There was the French Revolution. When the French Revolution happens, it is very, very dangerous to be a royal, to be an aristocrat, or to be associated with them. So after the arrest of the royal family during the French Revolution, Lebrun had to get the hell out of France. She and her very young daughter fled, and she eventually sort of lands in Rome, where her paintings were met with great critical acclaim. She becomes very famous in Rome. And it gets elected to what was called the Roman Accademia di San Luca, something like that. I hope I'm getting that pronounced correctly. I'll say she becomes very famous, but in her early time, she is working with the royal family who is much malaligned at this time by the angry masses who are going through revolutionary fervor. This is her painting of Marie Antoinette with her children, Marie Antoinette. You may recall, if you had any sort of history of France back in high school, she was the queen at the time, and many of the revolutionists sort of vilified her in particular. And right, one of the most famous lines everybody talks about is her, the line that was attributed to her. She probably never actually said it. Of when she was approached by a page who says, Your Majesty, the people are starving. What are they supposed to eat if we don't release more food stores to them? And she says, let them eat cake, right? Whether or not she ever actually said that story is indicative of how people felt about her. They felt about her like they felt about the aristocracy, that she and they had become completely disconnected with what the everyday people of France thought, believed, held dear to their hearts. And so here we have Lebrun performing a little bit of propaganda here, trying to help perhaps people to see Marie Antoinette as not that villain that they see her as, but rather a mother who loves her children, who has her children gathered in closely to her and has this connection with touch and sort of endearing looks and things of that nature. Right? She wants us to see that because that kind of visual language, this familial connections, would have appealed to the bourgeois and the revolutionists. So she's trying to take advantage of that here and present her not as this haughty, holier-than-thou figure who has no idea how hard it is for the masses who are starving, but rather someone who's just like you. This is also particularly interesting because, again, it is a painting that really could only be done by a woman. Because the royal family, perhaps, is a little less loosey-goosey with their gender roles than the aristocracy. And so there's still some rules in place that a woman's private chambers shouldn't be entered by a man other than her husband. This is in the case of the royalty. Because if a man is entering her chambers, he is doing so for one reason and one reason only. He has sex on the mind, right? And so Vigée-Lebrun here is a woman, and ergo can be allowed into her private chambers, which clearly is what we're seeing here. These are her private chambers. Her children are here, right? If a man had painted this, that would have seemed scandalous. she's a woman. She can be here, and there's no sense of impropriety because she is there. That makes this painting in particular one that this particular scene, her and her children, and the intimacy that we see here, quite possibly comes from that familiarity with Vigée Lebrun that she would not have had. Right? Decorum would have suggested she couldn't be like this with a man in her room. Then we'll take a look at what I was talking about, the criticisms that were sort of lobbed at Rococo at the time that it was current. And we'll take a look at two of its critics, William Hogarth and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, again, the criticisms that these two are going to be lobbing at it are what I bristle at. Right? For me, as I said before, my reason that I struggle a bit with the Rococo is more about the subject matter being something that I struggle to take seriously. And again, the way women are often treated in Rococo art, I struggle with that, and it makes it hard for me to look at that work and get excited to talk about it in serious terms. And that's my own hang-up. I don't want any of you to ever think that you should not like the Rococo because this old 45-year-old fart who struggles with it says he doesn't like it, right? I would never for a moment try to judge you for liking any of what you've just seen or any other Rococo art that we haven't had a chance to look at. You should absolutely enjoy the art that you enjoy. I would never discourage that, okay? Understood. But when we get to the criticisms of people like William Hogarth and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they're going to be making some arguments that I have a little more trouble getting behind. William Hogarth maybe a little bit more, but you'll see. All right, so William Hogarth. He was a British painter, born in 1697 and died in 1764. And he was a British painter, but he was also kind of a satirist. He made humorous paintings. And he did a whole series referred to as Marriage a la Mode. This particular one that we're looking at is Morning Party. This particular painting from the collection known as Marriage a la Mode that he painted between 1743 and 47. And this was a series of paintings that criticized the aristocracy and criticized Rococo. Interestingly, though, he does a pretty decent job of mimicking the Rococo style. I mean, look at this painting. It's a very asymmetrical design. All the action's kind of happening down here. The colors are very Rococo in nature. And at a cursory glance, it would be very excusable, rather, for one to mistake what they were looking at for a Rococo painting. However, it is meant to be a critique, not only of the Rococo, but of the aristocracy and their way of life that has produced it. So you see things like, okay, over here in this corner, we have this woman and this man, engaged in conversation, engaged with their hands, nearly touching one another. He is in, I mean, come on, guys. You're all in college, right? You know the stance of a lecturing professor who is just way deep into lecture, right? He is pointing and gesturing at this thing back here that he is lecturing on. At least I think Hogarth would be suggesting he is at least feigning to have an intellectual conversation about because he's lying down on this couch. And there is again this lady here. Now, where are they? They are in her bedroom. There's the bed back there. And the curtains of the bed have been parted. So the suggestion is, because this is called Morning Party, that these two over here have probably just had a tryst in there overnight, and it is now the morning after their little tumble in the sheets the night before. This is a lady of the house. This is her lover. But now, like Hogarth is like pointing out, in his mind at least, how crazy it is that then all these people are hanging out in this room with this woman here and this man, and we're all going to just act like and pretend like he didn't just the night before blink her right back there, right? Like we're just all going to like hang out and act like everything's cool and fine and pretend that we're discussing intellectual topics. That's his critique of this kind of stuff that I was just talking about earlier. Now, whether it's a fair critique or not, it is coming from a place of a man who belongs to what would be sort of the British middle class, right? And who sees that way of life as being unnatural. And over here, we have her husband. Now, let me sort of give you a closer view of this. This over here is her husband. Now, he's got all these horns sticking out of his head. Why? Well, he's a husband whose wife has been sleeping around on him. And the term for that, we still use it to this day, is that he is a cuckold, right? The term cuckold comes from sort of a superstition, if you will, that when a man's wife has slept with another man, has been unfaithful to him, he grows a horn. He becomes cuckolded by growing horns that he himself cannot see, but others who see him do see and know that his wife has been sleeping around him. It's a very patriarchal way of thinking about it. But again, Hogarth is trying to be funny here, and look at just how many horns this poor guy has on his head. This poor guy is just like sitting and sipping his tea like nothing's going on. There's no problem. Right? He has been through this many times. But then also, right, this is a criticism of the aristocracy. It's a criticism of the wealthiest class. And look at just how goofy he has painted everyone. Everyone is so cartoonishly painted. These are caricatures. Really, the only person who isn't given that kind of treatment is this woman right here herself. But even up above, there are these paintings that are meant to sort of be joking versions of Rococo paintings. Like in each one of them, I'll let you sort of take a closer look at them yourself. Excuse me, there's a little something weird happening in every one. And then over here, right, you have a painting, a portrait of this very dude right here in her love nest. Oh, Hogarth. But again, this is coming from a very patriarchal thing, right? Right. The middle class, they're all sort of rising up, and they want to start exercising some of that power. Who is in power? The aristocracy. So we have to set up the aristocracy as the villain, as the enemy. And so we need to vilify the things that they do. And a great one who did this was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was an 18th century writer and intellectual who saw the recent gains in power and influence of women as being specifically unnatural. Now, understand, Rousseau is someone that, if you are looking at sort of European history, if you're looking at particularly French history, he is an important intellectual whose ideas and work are very much sort of the precursors of what's going to happen in the French Revolution. And so you'll often hear him sort of mentioned in other aspects, right? Because it's his ideas and things that he writes down that lead to that. I'm not talking about that stuff necessarily. I'm specifically going to talk about how he felt about women and how that then leads to his critique of the aristocracy and Rococo art. But he saw those recent gains in women as being unnatural and being detrimental to the values of the burgeoning middle class, the bourgeois. The bourgeois had what Rousseau referred to as natural roles for men and women that were based in ancient Greek and Roman models. And his argument was that women, their natural place was in the domestic sphere, in the home, and they should be in submissive roles, specifically to their fathers when they're children, and to their husbands once they are married, and that men, their natural places in the public sphere, outside the home, laboring or pursuing intellectual pursuits. Right? These, again, are based on old Roman models and interpretations and misinterpretations of some of the things that St. Paul wrote in his letters in the New Testament. But let's think about, at least briefly, some of those things that Paul writes about when he does write about women, right? He says things along the lines of, when he's writing to churches who are asking him, like, what are we supposed to do? Like, how do we worship in our church? How do we organize what happens in the church? And he says things along the lines of, as far as I'm concerned, women shouldn't speak during church. And if they have a question about something, rather than speaking out during the service, they should first quietly ask their husband. If he approves, maybe they can speak up, or maybe he can ask on her behalf. And again, there are interpretations and misinterpretations of that get sort of applied to how women should be treated. But understand, Paul was a Roman citizen. And so a lot of that way of thinking was framed by a culture that he belonged to, the Roman culture, who had very specific ideas and roles that women were meant to play and that men were meant to play, and that no one was really meant to cross over into the other's territory. He saw Rococo art, the private salons and saloniers, as being absolutely immoral. And he is the one who coined that term, the feminization of art. Why is he saying that's immoral? Well, because again, if the natural roles of men and women are meant to be in the domestic sphere, men are meant to be in the public sphere, and again, recall, at this point, art is considered something you go and get training for at universities and things of that nature. It is considered man's work at this particular time, and that then seems like it should be the job of a man. A man should be the one going out and making the work, and the man should be the one buying the work and commissioning it, and the art should be made for the man's desires and preferences, right? Women are supposed to be at home, taking care of the home, taking care of the children. They are the domestic sphere. And so if they are putting themselves in positions like the saloniers of actually trying to educate people, that's stepping into men's territories. If they are purchasing art, that's in men's territory. And if some of those artists are women themselves, and worse than that, they are women making art that has been commissioned and being purchased by women, that is unnatural, immoral. What are these women doing? What the hell do they think they're doing, encroaching on men's territory? That is unnatural. They have gone outside the natural order. That is wrong. That is immoral. And they are taking art and turning it into just tripe that is women's work. That's this asshole Rousseau's words, not mine. Right? He's pointing to this stuff and saying, not only, as I was saying, is it just meh, I'm saying it's mess, it's meh art, and it's perhaps problematic. Perhaps it's a bit classist of me. I don't know, that to see like wealthy individuals just sort of going about their frivolous lives, that bugs me, that kind of thing, right? It's not that. He's saying, no, this stuff is immoral, and it is specifically immoral because those those crazy aristocrats don't know the place of a woman and the place of a man, and they have made a mockery of it all. That I can't get behind. I put my dukes up and I'll defend it against that. Right? I have no problem with Rococo being an art form that was by women for women. I like the fact that the Soloniers figured out a way to create, at least at the very least, an informal education system for women. And I can't get behind Rousseau's ideas here. But Rousseau, again, is an intellectual whose other ideas that he's writing about are voicing how the bourgeois feels at this time. And the bourgeois may not be as hardcore about those gender roles as Rousseau might suggest here, but they live in a culture like that. And if this way of thinking helps to vilify the aristocracy and make this revolution happen, they're going to grab onto it. And the French Revolution and the art style that becomes sort of the official art style of the French Revolution, neoclassicism, is what we'll talk about in part 2. I'll see you there.